Hi guys, welcome back to the DBS Institute YouTube channel with myself, DC Breaks. In this video, I'm going to be looking at a workflow that I use for processing 808 basses in Kilohearts Phase Plant. So before we jump into Phase Plant, the first thing we need to do is to get ourselves an 808. So if you don't know, an 808 really refers to the subby kick sample that was made famous by the Roland TR-808 drum machine, and it's now used in a huge amount of different musical genres, and is a kind of a classic sound for adding sub bass to really any music. So within Logic, there's lots of different 808s that we could kind of dial in. I'm just going to get another instrument here, come to the library and search for 808. So we could go for something that's like a synthetic 808. So this first patch here is an Alchemy preset. So it's just some sine waves with a little bit of modulation, which sounds like this. And we could use Perform and get some different characters within that and sample that to use. That would be one workflow. Again, it's synthetic, it's not a sort of authentic sample, if you like. There are some closer ones, which again, is not from the original hardware as far as I'm aware, but we could come down and grab a Roland TR-808 kit, come to the sampler, just need to find the kick from this list here. Here it is. And if we look at the zone, we can see this is called TR-808 kick 6C. We can find where that is in Finder, copy it to desktop or somewhere, and then chuck that into Phase Plant as well. So a few different workflows, if you like, for getting, or different ways of getting that sound into Phase Plant. I'm going to use the generator pick sampler here. We could also synthesize one within Phase Plant if we wanted to, but that's kind of beyond the scope of this video. And here's two that I picked out from the library earlier. So let's just load up this first one here and hear how that sounds. Now, to get the most out of this video, you're probably going to want to have some good quality headphones or a subwoofer to listen to the bass on. I'm just going to flick through to the other one as well. So you can see, although they're both ostensibly 808 kicks, they're both quite different. And so in terms of what we're doing here, it doesn't really matter which 808 you're using. And indeed, you might want to choose a bunch of different ones and create some different presets. But what I'm going to do now is walk through how I process these sounds. And from a drum and bass perspective, which is what I'm mainly interested in, I'm looking at how I can really fatten these sounds up as much as possible, retain a lot of that low end, but then also really drive them and make them quite sort of distorted and gnarly. So the great thing about Phase Plant is that you can inject that kind of distortion at lots of different places within Phase Plant and have a huge amount of control over how you do that. So one of the things that we could do is come to lane 1, bring in a multipass, and multipass then allows us to apply effects to different bands of our sound. So let's have a look at our sound here. You can see most of the information's in the low end, of course, as you might expect. So we can adjust our bands accordingly. And then we might choose to apply, for example, a factorator to the very sort of low sub band, this kind of mid sub, if you like. We could apply a different factorator. We could apply some different distortion to the top end. And then because of this sort of way of processing, we can blend in different amounts of distortion on these different channels. We can change the bands. We can do all sorts of stuff. We can process all of the signal as well. So let's just start by, for example, having drive on the low end, fuzz on the low mids, and this fold back here on the top end. And let's just listen to those in turn. So listen without. So these two, with not having as much to kind of work with, they're not doing as much. We can solo what these sound like. So it is adding a bit. We can turn the gain up. Kind of push things a bit harder that way. Try some different styles of distortion. See, that one's a lot more noticeable, for example. So, and really at this point, this is a bit of experimentation. So altogether, we now have something that sounds like that. We can, again, just kind of play around with these. There's no sort of right and wrong. We can process the whole signal. So it might be that we add in some other styles of distortion. And I tend to find that smaller amounts of different styles of distortion can really help make a sound, sort of really fill it out and kind of make it sound really rich. So this is getting into kind of classic Dillinger distorted bass kind of territory. And because we have the same workflow here as we do in Phase Plant, we can also add in some modulators. So something that sounds quite good, or can sound quite good, would be to put an envelope in here and use a slow attack. And it's going to be quite small amounts, but just to kind of subtly shift these bands. And this is going to affect the amount of processing or distortion that we have across the different bands. So let's try something like this. Maybe going the other way. So without it, kind of getting that slight sort of and that kind of a little bit of movement can really add a kind of pumping quality to 808, so that could be something that can really sort of be used to great effect. It kind of simulates that feeling if you hit when you get a bass hit and then the distortion kind of comes afterwards. That could be quite powerful. And we can also EQ this. Let's put in just a 3-band EQ. We could actually modulate the high on that as well to do a similar thing. Great, so we're starting to get somewhere now, making this sound a bit fatter. Another way that we can inject distortion into this is to actually do it within the signal here as well, and that combined with this can often lead to some interesting results as well. So if we just come to effects and add in some distortion, we don't need this envelope, we're going to put this straight into our group here. So the signal flow, as you can see, is the sample, goes into the distortion, goes into the envelope, and then is fed out into lane 1. So just starting with overdrive here, turn the mix all the way down. So that can be quite extreme, add in quite a lot of extra character. And then again, we can experiment with some different styles to see how they sound. So as I said, often combinations of different types, styles of distortion can be used to create more sort of richly interesting distortion rather than just one type of distortion. So what I'd like to do at this point is to take the macros and just use these to control some of these parameters. And that means that we can kind of get nice combinations of different sort of effects within the one preset. And that can, again, lead to some really interesting results. And that can also kind of speed up our workflow as we work through. Hey guys, I hope you're enjoying the content. Just to let you know that we offer online courses in a range of creative subjects. So if you're interested in taking your skills and knowledge to the next level, check out the link below. Now, if you're relatively new to Phase Plant, you might find all this a little bit overwhelming. So something I'd recommend is to explore some of the bundled presets for things like multipass. So if we just come up to the browse window and come to distortion, there's some really good sort of ready-made, purpose-built distortion presets that we can use. And this can really, again, speed things up. You can tweak them. They're often very sort of tweakable. And there's some great ones in the legacy folders as well. If we come to distorted here, there's some good stuff in here. So just for example, let's, in fact, I think there is a kind of, within bass enhancement, there's an 808 saturator. So this is a multi-band 808 bass saturator. Let's have a look at how that's set up. So similar to how I was doing before, we have 3 different styles of distortion across different bands. And it's been set up so that we can kind of mix in different styles of distortion across those bands. The other thing that this preset does as well is allows you to control how much of the signal's being pushed into these distortion units, and then that can kind of also really change the perception of the distortion and the color of the distortion as well. So let's hear how I'll turn off this distortion and our other one and just hear how this sounds. So without any distortion at all. So that really brings up that kind of harmonic content in the sort of second and third harmonics in this area, which is like a sort of a classic process in itself. Let's chuck it in with all the rest that we've got as well. And again, we can sort of play around with this by changing the order of the plugins, which can have some interesting results. We've got some different sort of controls here, which are the macros from Multipass itself. So it's easy to kind of tweak those. You can increase the amount of transient, for example. Mix control. So again, I would normally just look to pick some of the controls I think I'm going to end up using, like this transient control, and assign them to my master macros, if you like, so that I get control over the sound. And so now, by kind of playing around with some of these different combinations of macros, I can get lots of different 808 textures. Some nice kind of weird oscillation going into that one. So we can play with the drive here. And so we just go along like this, really building up different types of distortion in different ways through the preset, and that allows us to come up with some really good distortion types. So just to finish up then, a few other things I like to do. The disperser is a great snap-in that sounds great on bass as well. Really gives it that kind of zappy quality, so without. So that would be definitely something I'd look to add in as a macro. If you don't like the kind of effect of the disperser, another classic one is to use a little bit of pitch modulation on the transient of the bass sound, and we can easily set that up using an envelope with basically zero attack, a very short decay, often curved like so, and then we can assign this to the harmonic or the shift, or it doesn't really matter. We're just basically going to be doing a kind of a pitch bending type of effect. So without. Might be a bit extreme. And that can reinforce the transient as well. And again, we can then kind of control the amount by using a macro to determine how much of that signal is being sent to the pitch. And then just kind of adjusting to taste. So we can increase the decay to get a longer zap, if you like. And then really from there, the only other stuff I would tend to do would be on the lane 3, would be add in probably another EQ, so I can control the overall tone of whatever it is I've been kind of playing around with here. And I often also have a reverb just right at the end, because working with these sounds repetitively can be quite fatiguing on your ears. So just having a little bit of reverb can help to take the edge off a little bit. So I hope you enjoyed that quick dive into processing 808 in Phase Plant. As you can see, the nature of Phase Plant gives you a huge amount of flexibility in terms of how you approach processing these kinds of sounds, and can really lead to some interesting sound design possibilities. So let me know what you think in the comments. If you have any questions as well, I'll do my best to answer those for you. But that's it for now, and I'll see you in the next video.